The automatic doors slid open as Orion Bridges walked into his own store wearing a faded jacket and cap pulled low over his eyes. No one knew he was the billionaire CEO of the entire chain. He stopped, his gaze sweeping across the sales floor when he saw her, Kenya Vargas, standing behind the checkout counter, her left arm in a cast, a fresh black eye barely concealed by makeup, tears streaming down her face as she tried to scan items with her good hand. What Orion discovered would force him to choose between protecting his cover and protecting her life. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
The 42nd floor of the Peachtree Center Tower gleamed with morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Orion Bridges stood in his corner office, a man who had built an empire from a single grocery store his grandfather had left him 20 years ago. At 38, he commanded a chain of 47 Bridges Market locations across the Southeast, each one bearing his family name in bold red letters. His mahogany desk was covered with quarterly reports, profit margins that would make Wall Street analysts weep with joy. Revenue up 18%. Customer satisfaction scores holding steady at 4.2 stars. Employee turnover within industry standards. The numbers painted a picture of success that had earned him a spot on Forbes' 40 Under 40 list 3 years running. Orion picked up his coffee, imported from a small farm in Colombia that he'd visited personally to ensure quality. The irony wasn't lost on him that he knew more about the farmers who grew his coffee beans than the employees who sold them in his stores. But that was about to change. His assistant, Sailor Marks, knocked on the glass door before entering with a manila folder. "The anonymous complaint letters you requested, Mr. Bridges." Security traced them to 3 different locations, but they all mention the same store. Orion opened the folder and read the handwritten note on top. "Someone at the Lenox Square location is being pushed to the breaking point. You need to see what's really happening before it's too late. A concerned employee." The second letter was typed. "The manager at store number 23 is creating a hostile work environment. People are scared to speak up because they need their jobs. Please investigate before someone gets seriously hurt." The third was scrawled in desperate handwriting. "She comes to work with bruises and everyone pretends not to see. We want to help but don't know how. The system is failing her." Orion set down the letters, his jaw tightening. Store number 23 was his flagship location in Lenox Square Mall, the crown jewel of his empire. If there were problems there, they could spread throughout the entire chain. "Sir," Sailor asked, noting his expression, "cancel my meetings for the next week. I'm going undercover." "Undercover?" "I'm going to work at store number 23 as a regular employee. I want to see what's really happening on the ground level." Sailor's eyes widened. "Sir, is that wise? If the media finds out." "They won't. And Sailor? Not a word to anyone. Not even my brother." Across town in East Atlanta, Kenya Vargas stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to the purple bruise around her left eye. Her right hand shook as she worked, partly from the pain radiating up her broken left arm, partly from the fear that had become her constant companion. The cast on her arm was only 3 days old, a souvenir from Tuesday night when Ryden Gillespie had discovered she'd hidden $20 from her paycheck to buy their daughter new shoes. $20. That's all it had taken to send him into a rage that left her with a fractured radius and a black eye that makeup could barely hide. "Mama, are you okay?" 8-year-old Cecilia appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes wide with concern that no child should have to carry. "I'm fine, baby," Kenya lied, forcing a smile. "Just getting ready for work. Your arm still hurts, doesn't it?" Kenya knelt down to her daughter's level, wincing as the movement jarred her injured arm. A little, but it's getting better every day. You know what would make me feel better? What? A hug from my favorite girl. Cecilia wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck, careful to avoid the cast. I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky. From the living room came the sound of 6-year-old Moses watching cartoons, his laughter a bright spot in their dark apartment. Kenya had fought to keep that laughter alive, to shield her children from the worst of Ryden's violence. They knew Mama got hurt sometimes, but they didn't know why. They didn't know that the man they called Uncle Ryden was the source of their mother's pain. Kenya finished her makeup and checked the time. 7:15 a.m. She needed to leave in 10 minutes to catch the bus to Lenox Square. Missing the 7:30 bus meant being late, and being late meant facing the wrath of her supervisor, Joseph, who had already written her up twice this month for performance issues. She walked to the kitchen where Ryden sat at their small table, scrolling through his phone while eating the breakfast she'd prepared before tending to her injuries. He was a handsome man, 6 feet tall, with the kind of smile that had charmed her in college. That smile had hidden the monster underneath until it was too late. I need grocery money, he said without looking up. I gave you my whole paycheck yesterday. Not all of it. His voice carried a warning that made her stomach clench. I know you kept some back. Ryden, I need bus fare to get to work. And the kids need lunch money for school. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Are you arguing with me? Kenya's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. No, I'm just explaining. You're explaining? He stepped closer, and she instinctively backed against the counter. After what happened Tuesday, you're still trying to explain things to me. Please, she whispered, glancing toward the living room where her children were. Not in front of them. Ryden followed her gaze, then smiled that charming smile that fooled everyone else. You're right. We shouldn't upset the kids. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. Bus fare. But when you get home tonight, we're going to have a conversation about respect. Kenya took the money with trembling fingers, knowing that conversation was Ryden's code word for violence. She had to find a way out, but every escape route seemed blocked. He controlled their bank account, their lease was in his name, and he'd made it clear that if she ever tried to leave, he'd make sure she never saw Cecilia and Moses again. Thank you, she managed. That's better. Now give me a kiss goodbye. The kiss tasted like ashes and fear, but she endured it because the alternative was worse. Ryden grabbed her broken arm as she pulled away, not hard enough to re-break it, but enough to send lightning bolts of pain up to her shoulder. Have a good day at work, baby, he said sweetly, as if he hadn't just hurt her. Make sure you smile for the customers. Nobody likes a sad cashier. Kenya gathered her purse and jacket, kissed her children goodbye, and walked out into the November morning. The bus ride to Lenox Square took 45 minutes, 45 minutes of peace where Ryden couldn't reach her, couldn't hurt her, couldn't remind her of how trapped she was. She used the time to practice her customer service smile in the reflection of the bus window. Smile, even though your arm throbs with every heartbeat. Smile, even though you can barely see out of your left eye. Smile, because this job is the only thing standing between your children and homelessness. Bridges Market number 23 was already bustling when she arrived at 8:25 a.m. The morning shift was in full swing, with early shoppers grabbing coffee and pastries before work. Kenya clocked in and took her position at Register 4, the same station she'd worked for the past 2 years. You look terrible, said Nyla Hendricks, the cashier at Register 3. Maybe you should go home. I can't afford to go home, Kenya replied, adjusting her name tag with her good hand. That boyfriend of yours needs to learn how to treat a lady. Kenya's smile faltered for just a moment. I don't know what you mean. Nyla gave her a look that said she knew exactly what was happening but wouldn't push. In their world, everyone had problems, and survival meant minding your own business. The morning rush began, and Kenya fell into the rhythm of scanning, bagging, smiling. Each customer interaction was a small performance, a chance to pretend she was just a normal woman with a normal life. Some customers noticed her cast and asked what happened. Slipped on some ice, she'd say, the lie coming easier each time. But as the morning wore on, the pain in her arm intensified, and the makeup covering her black eye began to wear thin. By 10 a.m., she was fighting back tears, praying she could make it through her 8-hour shift without breaking down completely. That's when the automatic doors slid open, and a man in a faded jacket walked in. He looked like any other customer, maybe a construction worker or mechanic based on his clothes. But there was something different about the way he moved, the way his eyes took in everything around him. Orion Bridges had arrived at his own store, and he was about to discover that all the profit margins in the world meant nothing if the people creating those profits were suffering in silence. The automatic doors of Bridges Market number 23 slid open with their familiar whoosh, and Orion stepped inside, pulling his baseball cap lower over his eyes. The store smelled like fresh bread and floor cleaner, a combination he'd grown up with but hadn't experienced from ground level in years. From his executive visits, everything always looked perfect. Polished floors, fully stocked shelves, smiling employees lined up to greet him. This was different. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a well-run store, but the heavy silence of people afraid to speak. Employees moved like ghosts, heads down, avoiding eye contact with customers and each other. The energy felt wrong, like a guitar string wound too tight, ready to snap. Orion approached the customer service desk where a tired-looking man in his 50s sat behind a computer screen. His name tag read, Lawson Pugh, Customer Service Manager. "Excuse me," Orion said, keeping his voice casual. "I'm here about the part-time position. I called yesterday." Lawson looked up with the expression of someone who'd given up caring about anything beyond his next break. "You're the new guy. Dan, right?" "That's right. Dan Mitchell." Orion had chosen the fake name carefully, something forgettable and common. "Fill this out." Lawson handed him a clipboard with employment forms. "When you're done, I'll get Dash to show you around. He's the floor supervisor." As Orion filled out the paperwork with false information, he observed the store's rhythm. Customers moved through the aisles with purpose but no joy. Employees restocked shelves mechanically, like robots programmed for efficiency but not programmed to care. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. "Mitchell!" A sharp voice cut through the air. Orion looked up to see a man approaching, mid-30s, built like a linebacker, with a kind of swagger that screamed insecurity masked as authority. His name tag identified him as Dash Joseph, floor supervisor. "That's me," Orion replied, standing up. Dash looked him up and down with obvious disdain. "You ever worked retail before?" "Some. Mostly construction and warehouse work." "Well, this ain't a construction site. We have standards here. You show up on time, you do what you're told, and you keep your mouth shut. We don't need heroes or troublemakers. You understand?" Orion nodded, biting back the urge to remind this man that he was speaking to the owner of the entire chain. "Understood. Good. You'll be working register backup and floor support. When it gets busy, you help bag groceries and carry out heavy items. When it's slow, you stock shelves and clean. Your trainer today is Kenya." Dash pointed toward Register 4, where Orion saw her for the first time. Kenya Vargas stood behind the checkout counter, and Orion's breath caught in his throat. Her left arm was in a bright white cast from wrist to elbow, and despite the careful application of makeup, he could see the telltale purple shadow of a black eye. She was scanning items with her right hand, moving slowly and carefully, her face a mask of concentration and barely controlled pain. "Kenya!" Dash barked. "You've got a trainee. Show him the ropes, and don't baby him. We need him productive by tomorrow." Kenya looked up, and Orion saw her flinch at Dash's tone. When her eyes met his, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear. Not just discomfort or nervousness, but deep, bone-deep fear. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. Dash walked away, already shouting at another employee about something, and Orion approached Register 4. Up close, Kenya's injuries were even more obvious. The black eye was fresh, maybe 3 or 4 days old, and the way she held her casted arm suggested it caused her constant pain. "Hi," he said gently. "I'm Dan. I guess I'm working with you today." Kenya managed a small smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Kenya. Welcome to Bridges Market." "Thank you. So, what do I need to know?" For the next hour, Kenya walked him through the basics of the register system, how to bag groceries properly, and the store's customer service policies. She was a good teacher, patient and thorough despite her obvious discomfort. Orion found himself genuinely impressed by her knowledge and professionalism. "You've been here a while," he observed as she showed him how to process returns. 2 years. "It's a good job." The words came out automatically, like something she'd been trained to say. "Even with." Orion gestured vaguely toward her cast. Kenya's face went rigid. "I fell down some stairs at home. Clumsy me." Another automatic response, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who'd told the lie many times. Orion didn't push, but he filed the information away. In his experience, people who fell downstairs didn't usually end up with defensive wounds on their forearms and black eyes that looked suspiciously like someone had punched them. The morning rush picked up around 10:30, and Orion got his first real taste of working retail from the employee side. Customer after customer approached Kenya's register, and he watched her transform. Despite her injuries, despite the obvious pain she was in, she greeted each person with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. How are your grandkids? Mr. Rodriguez, did your wife like those flowers you bought last week? Cecilia, honey, tell your mom I said hi. And here's a sticker for being such a good helper." She knew them. Not just their names, but their lives, their families, their stories. This wasn't just customer service. This was community building, one interaction at a time. Then everything changed. A man in an expensive suit approached the register, talking loudly on his phone about some business deal. He threw his items on the counter without looking at Kenya, continuing his conversation as she began scanning. "Excuse me, sir," Kenya said politely when she reached an item without a barcode. "I need to get a price check on this pasta sauce." The man looked at her for the first time, his eyes immediately going to her black eye and cast. His expression shifted from annoyance to disgust. "Are you kidding me?" he said, loud enough for other customers to hear. "They've got the walking wounded working the registers now? This is supposed to be a high-end store, not a charity case." Kenya's face went white. "Sir, I just need to." "I don't want to hear excuses from someone who can't even take care of herself. Where's your manager? I want someone competent to handle my transaction." Orion watched Kenya's hands begin to shake. Her breathing became shallow, and he recognized the signs of a panic attack building. The other customers in line were staring, some with sympathy, others with the morbid curiosity of people watching a car accident. "Sir," Orion stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "There's no need to speak to her that way. She's doing her job." The man turned his attention to Orion. "And who are you?" Another charity case. I'm someone who believes in treating people with respect. Respect. The man laughed harshly. Look at her. She's obviously involved in something unsavory. Probably drugs or gangs. I don't want people like that handling my food. That's when Kenya broke. The panic attack hit her like a freight train. She gasped for air, her good hand clutching the counter as her legs threatened to give out. The customer's words had triggered something deep and primal, a fear response that went beyond embarrassment or professional humiliation. I can't, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this. Orion moved without thinking. He stepped behind the register, gently guiding Kenya to a chair that Nyla had quickly brought over from the next station. Breathe, he told her quietly. Just breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. To the customer, he said, I'll finish your transaction, sir. I don't want either of you touching my groceries, the man snapped. Then I suggest you shop somewhere else, Orion replied, his voice carrying an authority that made the man step back. Dash appeared as if summoned by the commotion. What's going on here? Your employee is having some kind of breakdown, the customer complained. This is completely unprofessional. Dash's face darkened as he looked at Kenya, who was still struggling to breathe normally. Kenya, what did I tell you about keeping it together? It wasn't her fault, Orion said quickly. This gentleman was being inappropriate. I don't care whose fault it is, Dash snapped. Kenya, you're done for the day. Go home. Please, Kenya managed to say through her tears. I need the hours. I can't afford. You should have thought about that before you made a scene. Clock out. Now. Orion watched Kenya's face crumble. Losing a day's pay was clearly a catastrophe for her, but she had no choice. She stood on shaky legs, gathered her purse, and walked toward the employee break room to clock out. The customer, apparently satisfied that he'd caused enough damage, left without buying anything. The other customers in line dispersed, some shaking their heads in sympathy, others just wanting to avoid the drama. And you, Dash turned to Orion. Mind your own business. You're here to work, not play hero. Understood, Orion replied, but his mind was racing. As he watched Kenya disappear into the back of the store, he realized that the anonymous letters had been right. Someone was being pushed to the breaking point, and he'd just witnessed it firsthand. But this wasn't about poor management or workplace stress. This was about something much darker, much more personal. The woman who had just been humiliated and sent home without pay wasn't just an employee having a bad day. She was someone living in fear, someone whose injuries told a story that had nothing to do with falling downstairs. And for the first time in his privileged life, Orion Bridges understood that all the money and power in the world meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect the people who needed protection most. He had a choice to make. He could maintain his cover, gather more information, and handle this through proper corporate channels. Or he could follow his instincts and find out what was really happening to Kenya Vargas. The decision would change both their lives forever. The employee break room smelled like microwaved leftovers and desperation. Orion found Kenya sitting at a small table in the corner, staring at her time card with the kind of devastation that comes from watching your lifeline slip away. Her good hand trembled as she calculated the hours she'd just lost. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" Kenya looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm fine. Just tired." It was the same automatic response she'd given about her injuries, but Orion could see through it now. Nothing about this woman was fine. "That customer was way out of line," he said, sitting across from her. "What he said to you was completely inappropriate. It doesn't matter." Kenya's voice was flat, defeated. Dash was right. I made a scene. I embarrassed the store. You had a panic attack because someone was cruel to you. That's not your fault. Kenya shook her head, gathering her purse. You don't understand. I can't afford to lose this job. I have 2 kids, and this is all I have. She stood to leave, but Orion gently touched her arm. She flinched so violently that she nearly fell backward, her face going white with terror. Don't touch me, she whispered, backing away from him like he was a dangerous animal. Orion raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you, but the damage was done. Kenya's reaction told him everything he needed to know about why she was so afraid, why she flinched at loud voices, why she wore long sleeves even in the Georgia heat. Someone had trained her to expect violence from men, and that someone was still very much a part of her life. I have to go, she said, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Kenya, wait. If you need help. I don't need help. I need to keep my job and take care of my children. That's all. She hurried out of the break room, leaving Orion alone with the weight of what he'd witnessed. He pulled out his phone and did something he'd never done before. He called his head of human resources directly. Megan, it's Orion. I need you to pull the employee file for Kenya Vargas at store 23. Sir, is everything all right? Just pull the file. I want to know everything. Her employment history, her emergency contacts, any incidents or complaints. I'll have it within the hour. Orion hung up and returned to the sales floor, where Dash was already assigning him to stock shelves in the canned goods aisle. For the rest of his shift, he worked mechanically, his mind focused on Kenya. Every few minutes, he found himself looking toward the exit, wondering if she'd made it home safely, wondering what kind of home she was returning to. At 3 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Megan. File attached. Call me when you've reviewed it. Orion stepped into the store's small office and opened the attachment. What he read made his blood run cold. Kenya Vargas, age 29. Hired 2 years ago as a part-time cashier. Excellent performance reviews. 0 customer complaints. 3 emergency contact numbers, all for the same person, Ryden Gillespie, listed as boyfriend and father of children. But it was the incident reports that told the real story. 6 months ago, employee arrived at work with visible facial bruising. Claimed she fell downstairs. Offered company health insurance assistance, which she declined. 4 months ago, employee called in sick for 3 consecutive days. Returned to work with arm in sling. Stated she had fallen off a ladder while cleaning gutters. 2 months ago, employee appeared distressed during shift. Supervisor noted she seemed afraid to go home. Employee denied any problems when questioned. Last month, employee's boyfriend came to store during her shift. Loud argument in parking lot observed by customers. Employee very upset afterward but refused to discuss incident. The pattern was clear, and it made Orion sick to his stomach. Kenya wasn't clumsy. She wasn't accident-prone. She was being systematically abused by the man who was supposed to love and protect her, and everyone at the store knew it but felt powerless to help. The next morning, Orion arrived at work early, hoping to catch Kenya before her shift started. He found her in the parking lot, sitting in an old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, talking on her phone. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept looking around as if expecting danger. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her again. When she saw him coming, she quickly ended her call and got out of the car. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling today?" "Better. Thank you for asking." The bruise around her eye had darkened overnight, and she'd applied even more makeup to try to hide it. "Listen, about yesterday. I wanted to apologize if I overstepped. I just hate seeing people treated badly." Kenya studied his face, as if trying to determine whether he was genuine or had some hidden agenda. "You don't know me. Why do you care?" It was a fair question, and Orion struggled with how to answer it without revealing his identity. "I guess I was raised to believe that we should look out for each other, especially when someone's going through a hard time." "I'm not going through a hard time," she said automatically. "Kenya, I've seen the way you flinch when people raise their voices. I've seen how you hold your arm like it's causing you constant pain. And yesterday, when I accidentally touched you, you looked at me like you thought I was going to hit you." Her face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not. But I know what fear looks like, and you're scared of something. Or someone." For a moment, her carefully constructed walls wavered. He saw the exhausted woman underneath, the one who was tired of pretending everything was fine when her world was falling apart. "Even if that were true," she said quietly, "there's nothing anyone can do about it. Some situations don't have easy solutions. There are always solutions. Sometimes we just need help finding them." Kenya shook her head. "You don't understand. I have children. 2 beautiful babies who depend on me. I can't take risks with their safety." "What about your safety? Don't you matter too?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her struggling with an answer. "I matter as much as I need to matter to take care of them," she said finally. "That's enough." Before Orion could respond, a black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot with squealing tires. Kenya's entire body went rigid, and the color drained from her face. "Oh no," she whispered. "He's not supposed to be here." The truck parked directly behind Kenya's car, blocking her in. A man got out, tall and muscular with the kind of swagger that screamed aggression. This had to be Ryden Gillespie. "Kenya," he called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "We need to talk." "I have to go to work," she called back, but her voice shook. "Work can wait. Get over here. Now." Orion watched Kenya's face transform. The woman who had been cautiously opening up to him disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like a frightened animal caught in a trap. "I should go," she whispered to Orion. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. You don't understand. If I don't go, he'll make a scene. He'll embarrass me in front of my coworkers. I could lose my job." "Kenya!" Ryden's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. "Don't make me come over there." Other employees were starting to arrive for their shifts, and Orion could see them watching the drama unfold. Some looked concerned, others just wanted to avoid getting involved. "Please," Kenya said to Orion. "Just pretend you don't know me. Don't get involved in this." "I can't do that." "You have to. You don't know what he's capable of." But it was too late. Ryden was already walking toward them, his face dark with anger. As he got closer, Orion could see the man's eyes, cold and calculating, the eyes of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "Who's this?" Ryden asked, looking Orion up and down with obvious disdain. "Just a co-worker," Kenya said quickly. "Dan, this is Ryden. Ryden, this is Dan. He's new." Ryden stepped closer to Orion, invading his personal space in a classic intimidation move. "You seem awfully interested in my girlfriend, Dan." "We were just talking about work," Orion replied calmly, though every instinct told him to step back. "Is that right?" Ryden's smile was cold and predatory. "Well, here's some free advice, new guy. Kenya's got enough problems without adding workplace drama to the mix. Maybe you should focus on your own business." "Maybe you should treat her with more respect," Orion said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ryden's face darkened, and Kenya made a small sound of distress. Excuse me. Ryden stepped even closer. Did you just tell me how to treat my woman? I told you to treat her with respect. That shouldn't be controversial. Dan, please, Kenya whispered, but Orion couldn't back down now. You know what I think, Ryden said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I think you need to learn to mind your own business before you get hurt. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice. From one man to another. The tension in the parking lot was thick enough to cut. Other employees had stopped to watch, and Orion could see Dash approaching from the store entrance. Everything okay out here? Dash called out. Everything's fine, Ryden replied, never taking his eyes off Orion. Just having a conversation with Kenya's new friend. Well, conversation time's over. Kenya, you're already 5 minutes late for your shift. Kenya looked between Orion and Ryden, her face a mask of terror and desperation. I have to go, she said to both of them. We'll finish this later, Ryden said to Orion. Then to Kenya, and we definitely need to talk tonight about your choice of friends. As Ryden walked back to his truck, Orion saw him grab Kenya's good arm, squeezing just hard enough to make her wince. It was a message, a reminder of who was in control. Don't, Kenya whispered to Orion as they walked toward the store. Please don't try to help me. You'll only make things worse. But as Orion watched Ryden drive away, he knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He'd seen enough to understand that Kenya was trapped in a cycle of abuse, and her abuser was escalating. The question was, how could he help her without making her situation more dangerous? The answer would come sooner than he expected, and it would force both of them to make choices that would change their lives forever. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is try to help someone who's drowning. But sometimes it's the only thing that matters. The morning shift at Bridges Market 23 felt different after Ryden's parking lot confrontation. Kenya moved through her tasks like a woman walking on thin ice, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement around her. Orion worked the floor, restocking shelves and helping customers, but his attention kept drifting to register for where Kenya scanned items with mechanical precision. She hadn't spoken to him since they'd walked into the store together. Every time their eyes met, she looked away quickly, as if even acknowledging his existence might bring more trouble down on her head. At 11:30 a.m., the mall's security alarm began blaring. Attention shoppers and employees, came the announcement over the intercom. This is a security lockdown. Please remain calm and stay where you are until further notice. All exits are temporarily sealed for your safety. Orion looked around the store as customers began murmuring nervously. Dash appeared from the office, his radio crackling with chatter from mall security. What's going on? Asked Nyla from Register 3. Armed robbery at the jewelry store, Dash announced. Suspects are still in the mall. Nobody in or out until they catch them. The automatic doors had already locked, their sensors disabled. Customers gathered in small groups, some calling family members, others just waiting anxiously. The employees continued working, but the atmosphere was tense. How long do these things usually last? Orion asked Lawson. Could be 20 minutes, could be 2 hours. Depends on whether they find the guys. Orion glanced at Kenya, who had gone pale at the announcement. She was gripping the edge of her register counter with her good hand, her breathing shallow. You okay? He asked, approaching her station. I need to call my kids, she said, her voice tight with panic. They get out of school at 3. If I'm not there, I'm sure this will be over by then. You don't understand. Ryden picks them up when I can't. And after this morning, after what you said to him. She trailed off, but Orion could fill in the blanks. Ryden would take his anger at Orion out on Kenya, and possibly the children. Can you call someone else? A neighbor, maybe. Kenya shook her head. He doesn't let me have other people's numbers. Says I don't need friends when I have him. The isolation was another classic sign of abuse. Cut off the victim's support system. Make them completely dependent on their abuser. Orion felt sick thinking about how thoroughly Ryden had trapped her. "Attention employees," Dash called out. "Corporate says we stay open during the lockdown. Keep serving customers. Keep things normal. Break rooms available if anyone needs to sit down." Most of the customers seemed content to wait it out, browsing the aisles or sitting in the small seating area near the deli. But Kenya was clearly struggling. Her hands shook as she tried to scan items, and she kept glancing at the locked doors like a caged animal. "Why don't you take your break?" Orion suggested quietly. "I can cover your register." "I can't. Dash will write me up if I leave my station during a busy time." "This isn't busy. Half the customers are just killing time." "You don't understand. I can't afford any more write-ups. I'm already on thin ice after yesterday." But as she spoke, her breathing became more labored. The panic attack was building again, and this time there was nowhere to run. "Kenya," Orion said gently, "you need to sit down." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. You're having a panic attack, and if you collapse at your register, that's going to be a lot worse than taking a break." She looked around the store, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. Just for a few minutes. The break room was empty except for them. Kenya sat heavily in one of the plastic chairs, her head in her hands. "I can't breathe," she whispered. "Yes, you can. Look at me." Orion knelt in front of her chair. "Breathe with me. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. They breathed together for several minutes until her color returned and her hands stopped shaking. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me. Are you feeling better?" "A little. It's just being trapped like this. It reminds me of..." She stopped herself. "Reminds you of what?" Kenya was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He locks me in sometimes. When he's angry. In the bedroom or the bathroom. Says I need time to think about what I did wrong." Orion felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "How long?" "Hours sometimes. Once it was all night. I missed work the next day because I was too weak to stand." "Kenya, that's imprisonment. That's a felony. It's my word against his. And he's very convincing when he wants to be. Charming. People like him. What about your children? Do they know? They think I'm sick when it happens. Ryden tells them Mama needs rest, and they're not allowed to bother me." Her voice broke. "They bring me drawings under the door. Little pictures to make me feel better." Orion closed his eyes, trying to process the horror of what she was describing. "How long has this been going on?" "It started small, just grabbing my arm too hard when he was upset. Then pushing. Then hitting. The locking me up started about 6 months ago, after I tried to leave." "You tried to leave?" Kenya nodded. "I took the kids to my sister's house in Savannah. But Ryden found us. He was so sorry, so convincing. Said he'd get help, go to counseling. My sister believed him. Even I believed him for a while. But he didn't get help. He got worse. Said I'd embarrassed him by running away. That I needed to learn my place." She touched her cast unconsciously. "This happened because I hid $20 to buy Cecilia new shoes. $20. Kenya, you have to know this isn't your fault." "Isn't it?" She looked at him with eyes full of pain. "I chose him. I brought him into my children's lives. I keep staying, keep making excuses. Maybe I deserve this. No. Orion's voice was firm. Nobody deserves to be hurt by someone who claims to love them. Nobody. You don't understand what it's like. I have no money, no family nearby, no friends. He made sure of that. If I leave, where do I go? How do I feed my kids? And he's made it clear that if I try to take them, he'll fight for custody. He has a good job, a clean record. I'm just a cashier with a history of accidents. There are resources. Shelters, legal aid. Shelters are temporary, and legal aid lawyers are overworked. They can't compete with the expensive attorney Ryden would hire. She shook her head. I've thought about this every day for 2 years. There's no way out that doesn't put my children at risk. Orion wanted to tell her he could help, that he had the resources to get her and her children somewhere safe, to hire the best lawyers money could buy. But he couldn't reveal his identity without destroying the trust they'd built. What if there was a way? He asked carefully. What if someone could help you disappear? Get you and the kids somewhere safe, with enough money to start over. Kenya laughed bitterly. That's a fairy tale. Rich people don't swoop in to save poor women from their problems. But if it were possible. It's not possible. And even if it were, I couldn't trust it. Ryden has taught me that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her situation settling between them. Outside the break room, they could hear the normal sounds of the store continuing to operate despite the lockdown. Can I ask you something? Kenya said suddenly. Of course. Why do you care? You barely know me. Most people see the bruises and look the other way. It's easier that way. Orion thought about how to answer without revealing too much. I had a sister once. Older than me. She got involved with a guy who hurt her. It wasn't entirely a lie. His cousin Rebecca had been in an abusive relationship in college, though she'd gotten out before it escalated to physical violence. What happened to her? She got away. But it took her years to trust anyone again. And she only escaped because she had family support, money, resources. Not everyone is that lucky. No, Kenya agreed quietly. Not everyone is. The thing is, she always said the worst part wasn't the fear or the pain. It was feeling invisible. Like she was screaming for help and nobody could hear her. Kenya's eyes filled with tears. That's exactly what it's like. So when I see someone who might be going through the same thing, I can't just walk away. Even if I can't fix everything, maybe I can make sure they know they're not invisible. You're a good person, Dan. But good people can get hurt trying to help people like me. People like you. Broken people. Complicated people. People with dangerous boyfriends who don't like interference. You're not broken. You're surviving an impossible situation with grace and strength. That's not broken. That's heroic. Kenya stared at him for a long moment. I haven't felt heroic in a very long time. Maybe it's time to start. Before she could respond, Dash's voice came over the intercom. All employees back to your stations. Lockdown's over. Suspects are in custody. As they walked back to the sales floor, Orion could see something had shifted in Kenya. Not hope exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. For the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't looking at the ground. Dan, she said as they reached her register. Yeah. Thank you. For listening. For not judging. It's been a long time since anyone did that. Any time. But as the afternoon wore on, Orion couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Ryden's confrontation that morning had been a warning, and men like him didn't make idle threats. If Orion was going to help Kenya, he needed to act soon. The question was, how far was he willing to go to save someone he barely knew? And what would happen when Ryden discovered that his girlfriend had found an ally? The answers would come sooner than either of them expected. When someone trusts you with their darkest secret, it becomes your responsibility too. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, but Orion could sense the change in Kenya. She moved with less tension in her shoulders, spoke to customers with genuine warmth instead of forced politeness. It was as if sharing her burden had lightened it, even just a little. At 4 p.m., during the shift change, Orion found himself alone with Kenya as she counted down her register. The evening crew was filtering in, and the store had that transitional energy of one team handing off to another. "Can I ask you something?" Orion said, pretending to organize receipt paper while keeping his voice low. "Sure. Earlier, you mentioned you tried to leave once. What made you try?" Kenya's hands stilled on the cash drawer. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice distant, as if she were remembering a different life. Cecilia came home from school with a black eye. Orion's blood went cold. "He hit your daughter?" "No, not directly." Kenya's voice was carefully controlled. "She got in a fight at school. Another kid said something about her mama always having bruises, asked if we were poor because we couldn't afford to be careful." "Jesus." Cecilia didn't understand what the kid meant, but she defended me. "Got into a fist fight over it." Kenya's voice cracked slightly. "My 8-year-old daughter got hurt defending me from something she doesn't even understand." "That's when you decided to leave." "That's when I realized my problems had become her problems." That night, I looked at both my kids and saw how they flinched when Ryden raised his voice. How they'd learned to be quiet when he was in a bad mood. How they'd started walking on eggshells in their own home. Kenya finished counting the 20s and moved to the 10s, her movements mechanical as she continued her story. I had been telling myself I was protecting them by staying. That a broken home was worse than a tense one. But seeing Cecilia's black eye, knowing she got it because of my situation, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. "So you took them to your sister's." "My sister Louisa. She lives in Savannah with her husband and their 2 kids. I thought we'd be safe there, that Ryden wouldn't follow us 3 hours away." "But he did." Kenya nodded, her jaw tightening. "He showed up 2 days later with flowers and tears. Said he'd been worried sick, that he'd already started seeing a therapist. He was so convincing, so broken up about almost losing us." "Your sister believed him?" "Everyone believed him. Ryden can be incredibly charming when he wants to be. He's handsome, well-spoken, has a good job in construction management. He told my sister he'd been under stress at work, that he'd been drinking too much, but that losing us had been his wake-up call." Orion watched her face as she spoke, seeing the pain of that betrayal still fresh after all this time. He even brought documentation. Proof that he'd enrolled in anger management classes, a letter from a therapist saying he was committed to change. My sister was impressed. She said I was lucky to have a man who was willing to fight for his family. "And you went back." "I went back." The words came out like a confession. Because part of me wanted to believe it too. Because I loved him once, and I wanted to believe that man was still in there somewhere. How long did the change last? 3 weeks. Kenya's laugh was bitter. 3 weeks of him being the perfect boyfriend, bringing me flowers, helping with the kids, being gentle and attentive. I actually started to hope. What happened? Moses spilled juice on Ryden's work shirt. It was an accident, just a 6-year-old being clumsy. But Ryden exploded. Screamed at Moses until the poor kid was sobbing, then turned on me for raising a careless brat. Kenya's hands were shaking now as she counted the fives. Orion wanted to tell her to stop, that she didn't have to relive this, but he sensed she needed to get it out. That night, after the kids were asleep, he told me the truth. The anger management classes were fake. The therapist letter was from a friend of his who owed him a favor. The whole thing had been an elaborate performance to get us back. Why go to all that trouble? Why not just let you go? Because it wasn't about love. It was about control. He said I belonged to him, that I didn't get to make decisions about leaving. That if I ever tried again, he'd make sure I lost the kids permanently. How could he do that? Kenya set down the money and looked directly at Orion. He documented everything. Every time I called in sick because of injuries he'd given me. Every time I was late because I was covering bruises with makeup. Every time I seemed unstable or unreliable at work. But those were because of what he did to you. Try proving that in court. He's never been arrested, never been charged with anything. I have no police reports, no hospital records that mention domestic violence. Just a pattern of accidents and clumsiness that could easily be explained by drug use or mental illness. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was more horrifying than Orion had imagined. Ryden wasn't just an abuser. He was a calculating predator who had systematically destroyed Kenya's credibility while building his own. He also has money, Kenya continued. His construction company does well, and he's saved up specifically for this. He's told me exactly how it would go. He'd hire a good lawyer, paint me as an unstable single mother who can't hold down a job or take care of herself, let alone 2 children. What about your work record here? You're clearly a good employee. Am I? I've been written up multiple times for attendance issues. I've had panic attacks in front of customers. Yesterday I had to leave early because I couldn't handle the stress. On paper, I look exactly like the kind of person who shouldn't have custody of children. Orion felt sick. Every system that should have protected Kenya had been turned against her. Her workplace, the legal system, even her own family had become weapons in Ryden's hands. There's something else, Kenya said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. What? The night I came back from my sister's, after he'd convinced everyone he was changed, he made me sign something. What kind of something? A confession. A letter saying that I'd made up stories about him hurting me because I was mentally unstable. That I'd been using drugs and that's why I had so many accidents. That I was an unfit mother who needed his help to take care of the children. Orion stared at her. You signed that. He said if I didn't sign it, he'd call the police and tell them I'd kidnapped the kids when I took them to Savannah. He had a lawyer friend ready to file papers. I would have been arrested that night. But it was coerced. It wouldn't hold up in court. Wouldn't it? A desperate woman signs a confession to avoid jail time? That sounds pretty believable to me. The register drawer slammed shut with more force than necessary, and Kenya immediately looked around to make sure no one had noticed. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't be telling you all this. It's not your problem. Yes, it is. No, it's not. You're a nice guy who tried to help, but this is bigger than kindness can fix. This is my life, and I have to live it. What if you didn't? What do you mean? Orion chose his words carefully. What if there was a way to disappear? Really disappear. New identities, new city, enough money to start over completely. Kenya stared at him. That's not real life. That's movies. It's more real than you think. There are organizations that help women in situations like yours. They have resources, connections. Even if that were true, Ryden would find us. He's obsessed. He's told me he'd rather see me dead than with someone else. Has he threatened to kill you? Not in so many words. But the message is clear. He owns me. And if he can't have me, no one can. The conversation was interrupted by Dash's voice over the intercom. Kenya, you're needed at customer service. Problem with a return. As they walked toward the front of the store, Orion's mind raced. Everything Kenya had told him painted a picture of a woman trapped in an impossible situation by a man who had systematically destroyed every avenue of escape. But there was one thing Ryden hadn't counted on. He hadn't counted on Orion Bridges. Kenya, Orion said as they reached the customer service desk. I want you to think about something. What? You said rich people don't swoop in to save poor women from their problems. But what if one did? What if someone with real resources, real power, decided to help you? Why would they do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Because everyone deserves to be safe. Because your children deserve to grow up without fear. Kenya looked at him for a long moment. You're talking crazy talk, Dan. Maybe. But crazy talk is sometimes the only thing that makes sense in a crazy situation. Before she could respond, an angry customer approached the desk, waving a receipt and demanding to speak to a manager. Kenya slipped into professional mode, but Orion could see her thinking about what he'd said. As he watched her handle the difficult customer with patience and skill, despite everything she was going through, Orion made a decision. He couldn't maintain his cover much longer. Ryden was escalating, and Kenya was running out of time. Tomorrow, he would have to choose between protecting his identity and protecting her life. And for the first time in his privileged existence, the choice was easy. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone, and some situations require more than good intentions. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Orion arrived early each morning, worked his assigned tasks, and found small ways to support Kenya throughout their shifts. He brought her coffee when she looked tired, covered her register when she needed bathroom breaks, and most importantly, he listened without judgment when she needed to talk. On Thursday morning, Kenya seemed different. Lighter somehow, as if sharing her story had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. She even smiled at a few customers, real smiles that reached her eyes. You seem better today, Orion observed as they restocked the candy display together. I feel better. A little. She paused, holding a box of chocolate bars. I haven't talked to anyone about my situation in so long. I forgot what it felt like to have someone actually listen. What about your sister? Don't you talk to her? Kenya's expression darkened. Louisa thinks I'm being dramatic. She says all relationships have problems, that I need to try harder to make it work. She doesn't understand that trying harder just gives him more opportunities to hurt me. That must be lonely. It is. Ryden made sure of that. He slowly convinced me to stop calling my friends, stop visiting family. Said they were jealous of our relationship, that they were trying to break us up. She shook her head. I can see it so clearly now, but at the time, it felt like love. Like he wanted me all to himself because I was special. Isolation is a classic control tactic. It's not your fault for not recognizing it. How do you know so much about this stuff? Orion had to think quickly. I did some reading after what happened with my sister. Wanted to understand the warning signs. It wasn't entirely a lie. After his cousin Rebecca's experience, he had educated himself about domestic violence. He just hadn't expected that knowledge to become so personally relevant. Tell me about your kids, he said, changing the subject to something that might bring her joy. Kenya's face immediately brightened. Cecilia is 8, and she's so smart it scares me sometimes. She reads at a high school level and asks questions about everything. She wants to be a scientist when she grows up. What kind of scientist? Changes every week. Last week it was marine biology because she saw a documentary about dolphins. This week it's astronomy because her teacher showed them pictures from the space telescope. And Moses. Moses is 6 and he's my little artist. He draws constantly. Pictures of our family, imaginary creatures, elaborate battle scenes between good guys and bad guys. Her smile faltered slightly. In his drawings, the good guys always win. That sounds like a healthy way for a kid to process the world. I hope so. I worry about what they're absorbing, what they're learning about relationships by watching Ryden and me. What do you tell them about your injuries? That Mama is clumsy. That I fell down, or walked into a door, or slipped in the shower. They're starting to ask more questions, though. Cecilia especially. She's too smart to keep believing the accident story much longer. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, arranging the candy display with practiced efficiency. The store was quiet, the mid-morning lull between the breakfast rush and lunch crowd. Can I ask you something personal? Kenya said suddenly. Sure. Are you married? Do you have kids? Orion hesitated. His real life included neither marriage nor children, just a series of relationships that had ended when women realized he was more committed to his business than to them. But Dan Mitchell, the persona he'd created, needed a different story. No wife, no kids. Came close once, but it didn't work out. What happened? She said I worked too much, that I cared more about my job than about her. She wasn't wrong. It was closer to the truth than he'd intended. His last serious relationship had ended exactly that way, with accusations that he was married to his company instead of to her. Do you regret it? Sometimes. Especially when I see families like yours. Kids who love their mom so much they draw pictures to make her feel better. Kenya smiled sadly. They're the only reason I keep going some days. When everything else feels hopeless, I look at them and remember that I have to be strong. They need me. They're lucky to have you. I don't always feel like a good mother. Good mothers don't let their children live in fear. Good mothers do whatever it takes to survive so their children have a chance at a better life. That's exactly what you're doing. Is it, though? Or am I just making excuses for being too scared to leave? It was a question that clearly haunted her, and Orion could see the guilt eating away at her self-worth. Kenya, you're not scared. You're smart. You've calculated the risks, and right now, staying feels safer than leaving. That's not cowardice. That's survival. But what if I'm wrong? What if staying is actually more dangerous? What do you mean? Kenya glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then lowered her voice. He's getting worse. More violent, more unpredictable. Last week, he threw a plate at the wall because dinner was 5 minutes late. The kids were terrified. Has he ever hurt them directly? Not yet. But I can see him thinking about it sometimes. When Moses is being loud, or when Cecilia asks too many questions. There's this look in his eyes, like he's considering it. That's escalation. It means the situation is becoming more dangerous, not less. I know. That's what scares me. I keep thinking maybe I should try to leave again, but then I remember what happened last time. How he found us, how he convinced everyone I was the problem. What if this time was different? What if you had help? What kind of help? Orion was walking a tightrope. He wanted to offer her real assistance, but he couldn't reveal his identity without destroying the trust they'd built. There are organizations, domestic violence shelters, legal aid societies, victim advocates, people who understand what you're going through and know how to help. I've looked into that. The waiting lists are months long, and most shelters can only house families for 30 days. What happens after that? There are transitional housing programs, job training, financial assistance, all of which require paperwork, documentation, proof of abuse, and all of which Ryden could challenge in court with his expensive lawyers. She was right, and they both knew it. The system was designed to help, but it was also overwhelmed and underfunded. For someone in Kenya's situation, with an abuser who had systematically destroyed her credibility, traditional resources might not be enough. What if money wasn't an issue? Orion asked carefully. What if you had enough resources to disappear completely? New identities, new city, enough money to start over. Kenya stopped arranging candy and stared at him. Why do you keep talking about this fantasy scenario? It's not real. But if it were real, if someone offered you that kind of help, would you take it? Of course I would. But Dan, that's not how the world works. Rich people don't just decide to save random cashiers from their problems. Some do. Name one. Orion couldn't, at least not without revealing who he was. But he could plant seeds, make her think about possibilities she dismissed as impossible. There are anonymous donors who fund domestic violence programs. Wealthy people who've been touched by this issue somehow and want to help. Even if that were true, how would they find me? How would they know I need help? Maybe they wouldn't find you. Maybe you'd find them. What does that mean? Before Orion could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number. Tell your girlfriend to stay away from my woman, or you'll both regret it. Ryden had somehow gotten his phone number. Everything okay? Kenya asked, noticing his expression. Yeah, just work stuff. He deleted the message, but his mind was racing. How had Ryden gotten his number? Had he been watching them? Following Kenya to work? Dan, you look pale. What's wrong? Nothing. I just remembered I need to make a phone call. He excused himself and stepped into the store's small office, closing the door behind him. His hands shook as he called his head of security. Atlas, it's Orion. I need you to run a background check on someone. Ryden Gillespie works in construction management in Atlanta. Sir, is everything all right? You sound stressed. Just run the check. I need to know everything about this guy. Criminal history, financial records, employment history, everything. I'll have it within the hour. Orion hung up and stared at his phone. The text message was a clear escalation, a sign that Ryden was feeling threatened by Orion's friendship with Kenya, which meant the situation was about to get much more dangerous. When he returned to the sales floor, Kenya was helping a customer, but she kept glancing at him with concern. He tried to act normal, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating risks and options. The truth was becoming unavoidable. He couldn't protect Kenya as Dan Mitchell, part-time employee. He had resources, power, connections that could help her, but only if he revealed who he really was. The question was, would she trust him when she learned he'd been lying to her from the beginning? Or would she see his deception as just another form of manipulation? As the afternoon wore on, Orion realized he was running out of time to find out. Ryden's text message was a warning, and men like him didn't make idle threats. Tomorrow, everything would change. The only question was whether it would change for the better or for the worse. Sometimes the people who need help most are the hardest to help. Friday morning arrived with an ominous weight that Orion felt the moment he woke up. The background check on Ryden Gillespie had arrived in his email at 2 a.m., and what he'd read had kept him awake for the rest of the night. Ryden wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator with a pattern. 2 previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders against him, both of which had mysteriously been dropped after the women moved out of state. A former co-worker had accused him of harassment, but the complaint had been withdrawn after she suddenly quit her job. There were no convictions, no official record of violence, but the pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to read between the lines. Ryden Gillespie was dangerous, and he was escalating. Orion arrived at the store 30 minutes early, hoping to catch Kenya before her shift started. He found her in the parking lot, sitting in her car with the engine running, talking on her phone. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept looking around as if expecting danger. When she hung up and got out of the car, he could see she'd been crying. "Hey," he said gently as she approached the employee entrance. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said automatically, but her voice was shaky. "Kenya, what happened?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the fresh bruise on her cheek, and there were finger-shaped marks on her throat that she tried to cover with concealer. "He knows," she whispered. "Knows what?" "About you. About us talking. Someone told him they saw us having lunch together in the break room yesterday." Orion's stomach dropped. "Who told him?" "I don't know. Could have been anyone. Customers, employees, someone from the mall." She wrapped her arms around herself, despite the warm November morning. "He was waiting for me when I got home last night." "Did he hurt you?" "He was angry. Angrier than I've ever seen him. He said I was cheating on him, that I was making him look like a fool." "You weren't cheating. We were just talking." Try explaining that to him. In his mind, any conversation with another man is betrayal. They walked into the store together, and Orion could see other employees staring. Word had clearly gotten around about Kenya's latest accident. "What did you tell him about me?" "The truth. That you're just a co-worker, that we barely know each other." "But he doesn't believe me. He thinks." She trailed off. "He thinks what?" "He thinks you're trying to steal me from him. He's convinced that you're some kind of threat." If only he knew, Orion thought grimly. "What else did he say?" "He wants me to quit. Says this job is causing too many problems, that I'm meeting the wrong kind of people." "You can't quit. You need this job." "I know. But he's not giving me a choice. He said if I come to work today, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Kenya's hand went unconsciously to her throat, touching the finger marks. "He was very specific about what he'd do to me." "And to you?" "He threatened me?" "He said he knows where you live, what kind of car you drive. He said accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business." Orion felt a chill run down his spine. Ryden had been watching him, following him, which meant he knew about the expensive hotel where Dan Mitchell was staying, the luxury car he drove. It wouldn't take much investigation to realize that a part-time grocery store employee couldn't afford either. "Kenya, you can't go home tonight. It's not safe." "I have to. My children are there." "Then take them and leave. Go to your sister's, go to a hotel, anywhere but home." "With what money?" "And even if I could afford it, he'd find us. He always finds us." They were interrupted by Dash's arrival, his usual scowl even deeper than normal. "Kenya, you're 10 minutes late clocking in. And what happened to your face this time?" "I walked into a door," she said quietly. "Right. Well, try to be more careful. We can't have employees looking like they've been in a bar fight." Orion wanted to grab Dash by the throat and explain exactly what kind of door had hit Kenya, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone. The morning shift started normally enough, but Orion could feel the tension building. Kenya jumped at every loud noise, flinched every time a male customer approached her register. She was operating on pure adrenaline and fear, and it was only a matter of time before she broke. At 11:30 a.m., the automatic doors slid open and Ryden Gillespie walked in. He looked different in daylight, more imposing somehow. 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the kind of confident swagger that came from never having faced real consequences for his actions. He wore work clothes, jeans, and a company polo shirt, but there was something predatory in the way he moved through the store. Kenya saw him immediately. The color drained from her face, and her hands began to shake. "What's he doing here?" Orion asked quietly. "I don't know. He's supposed to be at work." Ryden made a show of shopping, picking up items randomly and putting them in a cart. But his eyes never left Kenya, and his message was clear. "I'm watching you." For 20 minutes, he wandered the aisles, occasionally stopping to stare at Kenya's register. Other employees noticed and began whispering among themselves. Customers sensed the tension and started avoiding that section of the store. Finally, Ryden approached Register 4 with his cart full of random items. "Hey, baby," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Thought I'd surprise you at work." "Hi," Kenya managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You look tired. Maybe you should come home early today. Take care of yourself." "I can't. I have to work my full shift." "Do you?" Ryden's voice carried a subtle threat that made Orion's skin crawl. "I think your health is more important than this job." "Sir, is there a problem here?" Dash had appeared, drawn by the commotion. "No problem at all," Ryden said with his charming smile. "Just a concerned boyfriend checking on his girl. She's been having some health issues lately. Accidents, you know how it is." "Right. Well, as long as she can do her job." "Oh, she can do her job. Can't you, baby?" Kenya nodded, not trusting her voice. Ryden began placing items on the conveyor belt, but instead of the random groceries he'd collected, he started pulling things from his pockets. A roll of duct tape, zip ties, a box cutter. "Just some supplies for a home project," he said casually, but his eyes were locked on Kenya's face, watching her reaction. Orion felt sick. The items weren't random. They were a message, a preview of what Ryden planned to do to her. "That'll be $47.83, Kenya said, her voice shaking. "Put it on my tab," Ryden said, then leaned across the counter. "I'll see you at home tonight. We have a lot to talk about." He kissed her cheek, and Orion saw her flinch at the contact. Then Ryden turned and walked toward the exit, leaving his purchases on the counter. "Wait," Dash called after him. "You need to pay for these items." "Bill me," Ryden called back without stopping. The automatic doors closed behind him, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. "What was that about?" Dash asked. "Nothing," Kenya said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." But Orion could see she was falling apart. Her hands shook as she tried to void the transaction, and tears were streaming down her face. "Kenya," he said quietly, "you can't go home tonight." "I have to. If I don't, he'll come looking for me. And if he comes here, then we call the police. And tell them what? That my boyfriend bought duct tape and zip ties? That's not illegal. It's intimidation. It's threatening behavior. It's his word against mine. And he's very convincing when he wants to be." The lunch rush was starting, and customers were beginning to line up at the registers. Kenya tried to compose herself, but she was clearly in no condition to work. "Take your break," Orion suggested. "I can't. Dash will write me up." "I'll cover for you." "You don't understand. I can't afford any more problems at work. This job is all I have." But as she spoke, Her breathing became labored. The panic attack was building again, and this time there was nowhere to hide. Kenya, you need to sit down. I'm fine. No, you're not. The next customer in line was an elderly woman who took one look at Kenya's distressed state and immediately became concerned. Honey, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, ma'am. How can I help you today? But Kenya's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't scan the items. The barcode reader slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. That's it, Orion said. You're taking a break. I can't. Yes, you can. I'll handle this. He gently guided her away from the register, ignoring Dash's protests from across the store. In the break room, Kenya collapsed into a chair and buried her face in her hands. He's going to kill me, she whispered. Tonight, when I get home, he's going to kill me. No, he's not. Because you're not going home. I have to. My children. We'll figure something out. But you can't go back to that house. Not tonight. You don't understand. There's nowhere else to go. No one else who can help. Orion looked at this broken woman, this mother who was willing to die to protect her children, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Yes, there is, he said quietly. There's me. Dan, you're sweet, but you can't. My name isn't Dan, he interrupted. And I can help you more than you know. Kenya looked up at him, confusion replacing fear for a moment. What do you mean? Orion took a deep breath. It was time to tell the truth, even if it meant losing her trust forever. My name is Orion Bridges. I own this store. I own this entire chain. And I'm going to make sure you and your children are safe, no matter what it takes. The silence that followed was deafening. Kenya stared at him as if he'd just told her he was from another planet. That's not possible, she whispered. It's true. I came here undercover because of anonymous complaints about employee mistreatment. I never expected to find. He gestured helplessly. You're lying. I'm not. And I can prove it. But before he could say anything else, the break room door burst open and Dash stormed in. What the hell is going on? Kenya, you've got customers waiting, and you're back here having another breakdown. She's done for the day, Orion said, standing up. Who asked you? You're just a part-time employee. You don't get to make decisions about. Actually, I do. Orion pulled out his phone and showed Dash his contact information. Call corporate. Ask them who Orion Bridges is. Dash's face went white as he read the screen. That's impossible. You're just. I'm the owner of this company. And you're fired. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Kenya stared at Orion with a mixture of shock, betrayal, and something that might have been hope. You lied to me, she whispered. Yes, but everything else was real. My concern for you, my desire to help, all of that was real. Why should I believe you? Because, Orion said, pulling out his wallet and showing her his real ID, I'm about to risk everything I've built to keep you safe. Outside the break room, they could hear Dash on the phone, his voice rising as he tried to explain the situation to someone at corporate. But Orion's attention was focused entirely on Kenya, waiting to see if she would trust him with her life. The next few minutes would determine whether his revelation would save her or destroy the fragile bond they'd built. Sometimes the truth is the most dangerous thing you can offer someone. When have you had to choose between honesty and safety? The break room felt like it had shrunk to the size of a closet. Kenya stared at Orion's driver's license, her eyes moving between the photo and his face as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Orion Bridges, she read aloud. CEO, Bridges Market Corporation. Yes, you're really him. The billionaire who owns all of this. I am. Kenya set the ID down on the table with trembling fingers. So everything you told me was a lie. Not everything. My concern for you is real. My desire to help is real. The story about my sister. That was my cousin, but the situation was real. But Dan Mitchell doesn't exist. No. He doesn't. Kenya stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out over the parking lot. I told you things. Personal things. Things I've never told anyone. I know. And the whole time, you were lying to me. I was trying to understand what was happening in my stores. I never expected to meet someone like you. Someone like me? Her voice was sharp now, anger cutting through the shock. You mean someone pathetic enough to fall for your act? Someone brave enough to survive what you've survived. Someone strong enough to keep going when most people would have given up. Kenya whirled around to face him. Don't try to make this about my strength. This is about your deception. You're right. I lied to you, and I'm sorry. But Kenya, we don't have time for this right now. Ryden is escalating, and you're in real danger. How do I know this isn't just another lie? How do I know you're not just some rich guy who gets off on playing with poor people's lives? The accusation hit Orion like a physical blow. Because I'm about to prove it to you. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Atlas, it's Orion. I need a full security detail at Bridges Market number 23 immediately. And I need you to coordinate with Atlanta PD for protective custody for a domestic violence victim and her 2 children. Sir, what's the situation? I'll explain later. Just get here. Now. He hung up and looked at Kenya, who was staring at him with wide eyes. What did you just do? I called my head of security. He's former FBI, and he has connections with law enforcement. Within the hour, you'll have police protection. I can't afford police protection. You're not paying for it. I am. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Kenya shook her head. Rich people don't just decide to save random cashiers. There has to be something in it for you. What could possibly be in it for me? I don't know. Maybe you think I'll be grateful enough to sleep with you. Maybe you get some kind of thrill from playing hero. Orion felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to stay calm. Is that really what you think of me? I don't know what to think. A week ago, you were Dan, a nice guy who worked construction. Now you're telling me you're a billionaire who wants to save my life. It's a lot to process. I understand that. But Kenya, we're running out of time. Ryden made his intentions clear with those items he brought to your register. He's planning to hurt you tonight. So what's your solution? You wave your magic billionaire wand and make all my problems disappear. Something like that, yes. And what happens to my children while you're saving me? They're at school right now, completely unprotected. If Ryden decides to take his anger out on them. Orion pulled out his phone again. What school do they attend? Why? Because I'm going to make sure they're safe too. Riverside Elementary. But you can't just. Orion was already dialing. This is Orion Bridges. I need to speak to the principal at Riverside Elementary immediately. It's an emergency involving the safety of 2 students. Kenya watched in amazement as Orion was connected within seconds, his name apparently carrying enough weight to bypass all normal protocols. Principal Martinez? This is Orion Bridges from Bridges Market Corporation. I need to arrange immediate protective custody for 2 students, Cecilia and Moses Vargas. Their mother is a victim of domestic violence, and we have reason to believe the children may be in danger. He listened for a moment, then continued. I'm coordinating with Atlanta PD. Officers should be there within 30 minutes to escort the children to a safe location. Yes, I'll take full responsibility. When he hung up, Kenya was staring at him with a mixture of awe and terror. You just did that. You just made one phone call and arranged protection for my children. Yes. How? Money talks. Influence opens doors. And when you tell people that children are in danger, they tend to listen. But what if you're wrong? What if this just makes everything worse? How could it be worse? Kenya, you told me yourself that you think he's going to kill you tonight. At least if I go home, I know where he is. I know what to expect. This is chaos. Orion could see the fear in her eyes, and he realized that for someone who had lived under Ryden's control for so long, the unknown was more terrifying than the familiar danger. I know this is scary. I know you don't trust me right now, but I'm asking you to take a leap of faith. Why should I? Because the alternative is going home to a man who bought duct tape and zip ties and told you there would be consequences for talking to me. Before Kenya could respond, there was a commotion outside the break room. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with the store employees. Where is she? The voice was unmistakably Ryden's, and it was getting closer. Kenya went white. He's here. He's not supposed to be here. Stay calm, Orion said, but his own heart was racing. The break room door burst open, and Ryden filled the doorway. His face was flushed with anger, and there was something wild in his eyes that made Orion's blood run cold. There you are, Ryden said, his voice deceptively calm. I've been looking for you. I'm at work, Kenya said, backing away from him. You can't be here. Can't I? I'm a paying customer. I have every right to be here. Sir, you need to leave, Orion said, stepping between Ryden and Kenya. Ryden's attention shifted to him, and Orion saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Well, if it isn't the hero. You know, I've been doing some research on you, Dan. Very interesting what I found. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? See, I followed you to your hotel last night. Fancy place. Expensive car. Made me curious about what kind of construction worker can afford the Four Seasons. Orion's stomach dropped. Ryden knew. So I did a little digging. Made some calls. And you know what I discovered? There is no Dan Mitchell working construction in Atlanta, but there is an Orion Bridges who owns this whole chain of stores. Ryden, please, Kenya said. Just leave. We can talk at home. Oh, we'll definitely talk at home. But first, I want to have a conversation with your new boyfriend here. He's not my boyfriend. He's just... Just what? Just a billionaire who's been playing dress-up to get close to you? You think I'm stupid, Kenya? You think I don't know what's going on here? Nothing's going on, Kenya said desperately. I swear, nothing happened between us. Maybe not yet, but he's been filling your head with ideas, hasn't he? Making you think you're too good for me. Making you think you deserve better. She does deserve better, Orion said quietly. Excuse me. She deserves better than a man who hits her. Better than a man who threatens her. Better than a man who terrorizes her children. Ryden's face darkened. You don't know anything about our relationship. I know enough. Do you? Did she tell you how she begged me to take her back after she ran away? Did she tell you how she signed a confession admitting she made up stories about me? I know about the coerced confession. I know about the systematic abuse. I know about the isolation and the financial control. You know what she told you, but Kenya's not exactly reliable, Are you, baby? She has a history of making things up when she doesn't get her way. That's not true, Kenya whispered. Isn't it? Remember when you told your sister I was hitting you? Remember how embarrassed you were when she didn't believe you? Orion could see Ryden's tactics at work. Gaslighting, making Kenya question her own reality, her own memories. I believe her, Orion said firmly. Of course you do. Rich boy wants to play hero, save the damsel in distress. But what happens when you get bored? What happens when you realize she's not worth the trouble? That's not going to happen, isn't it? You've known her for what, a week? And you're ready to turn her whole life upside down? You think that's love? That's obsession. This isn't about love. This is about basic human decency. Human decency? Ryden laughed. You lied to her for a week. You manipulated her into trusting you. How is that decent? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Orion had lied, had manipulated the situation to get close to her. You're right, he said. I did lie, but I'm trying to make it right. By destroying her family? By taking her children away from their father figure. You're not their father. You're their abuser. I've never laid a hand on those kids. Yet. But we both know it's only a matter of time. Ryden stepped closer, and Orion could smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking, which made him even more dangerous. You know what I think, Ryden said. I think you need to mind your own business before you get hurt. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The tension in the room was explosive. Orion could see Kenya pressed against the wall, terrified of what was about to happen. Ryden, please, she said. Let's just go home. We can work this out. Oh, we're going home. But first, your boyfriend and I need to reach an understanding. I understand perfectly, Orion said. You're a coward who beats women because you can't handle your own inadequacies. The words hit their target. Ryden's face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward. But before he could reach Orion, the break room door opened again, and 3 Atlanta police officers entered, followed by a man in an expensive suit who could only be Atlas, Orion's head of security. Atlanta PD, the lead officer announced. We're responding to a domestic violence call. Ryden froze, his hands still raised in a threatening gesture. Officers, thank God you're here, he said, immediately switching to his charming persona. This man has been harassing my girlfriend. I came to pick her up from work and found him threatening her. That's not true, Kenya said quietly. Ma'am, are you Kenya Vargas? The officer asked. Yes. We're here to escort you and your children to a safe location. Are you ready to come with us? Kenya looked between Ryden and Orion, her face a mask of terror and indecision. I don't know. Kenya, Ryden said, his voice soft and pleading now. Don't do this. Don't let him destroy our family. Think about the kids. Think about what this will do to them. Think about what staying will do to them, Orion countered. Ma'am, the officer said gently, the decision is yours. But we can't protect you if you don't want our protection. Kenya closed her eyes, and Orion could see her struggling with the biggest decision of her life. Stay with the familiar hell, or trust a man who had lied to her to lead her into an uncertain future. When she opened her eyes, they were filled with tears, but also with something Orion hadn't seen before. Determination. I'll go with you, she said quietly. Kenya, no, Ryden pleaded. Please, baby, don't do this to us. I'm sorry, she whispered. But I can't do this anymore. As the officers escorted her out of the break room, Ryden turned to Orion with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "You have no idea what you've just started." "Yes, I do," Orion replied. "I've started the end of your reign of terror." But as he watched Ryden being led away in handcuffs for threatening behavior, Orion knew the man was right about one thing. This was far from over. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone who's already broken your trust once. When have you had to choose between the devil you know and the angel you're not sure about? 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Kenya Vargas Center for Domestic Violence Survivors, casting golden light across the reception area where children's artwork covered the walls. Kenya stood in the main conference room, adjusting the microphone at the podium, her hands steady and confident in a way they hadn't been in years. The cast was long gone from her arm, and the bruises had faded completely. But more than her physical healing, it was the transformation in her spirit that took Orion's breath away. The fearful, broken woman he'd met at Register 4 had become a powerful advocate, a beacon of hope for other survivors. "Are you nervous?" Orion asked, approaching her with 2 cups of coffee. "Terrified," Kenya admitted with a smile. "But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something important." Today marked the official opening of the center, a 15,000 square foot facility that provided emergency housing, legal services, counseling, job training, and childcare for domestic violence survivors. It was the first of 5 such centers that Orion planned to fund across the Southeast, each one bearing Kenya's name. "The reporters are here," Atlas announced from the doorway. Channel 2, Channel 5, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, plus representatives from the mayor's office and the governor's office. "And the most important guests?" Kenya asked. "Cecilia and Moses are in the children's area with the other kids. They're excited to see their mom on TV." Kenya's children had thrived in the months since leaving Ryden. Cecilia, now 9, had thrown herself into her studies with renewed vigor, no longer distracted by the tension at home. Moses, 7, had started therapy to process what he'd witnessed, and his drawings had evolved from battles between good and evil to pictures of families laughing together. "What about Ryden?" Orion asked Atlas quietly. "Still in prison. The assault charges from the store incident, plus the violation of the restraining order when he tried to contact Kenya last month. His lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, but the DA isn't interested. He's looking at 2 to 5 years. It had taken months to build the case against Ryden, but Orion's resources had made all the difference. Private investigators had tracked down his previous victims, convincing them to come forward. Financial experts had documented his pattern of economic abuse. The coerced confession Kenya had signed was thrown out as evidence of his manipulative behavior rather than proof of her instability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Atlas announced to the gathered crowd, "please welcome the founder and director of the Kenya Vargas Center, Kenya Vargas." Applause filled the room as Kenya approached the podium. Orion watched from the side, remembering the woman who had once been too afraid to speak up for herself, now about to address a room full of reporters and officials. 6 months ago," Kenya began, her voice clear and strong, "I was a woman trapped in a cycle of abuse, convinced that I had no options, no hope, and no value beyond what my abuser told me I had." The room was completely silent, everyone hanging on her words. "I worked at a grocery store, trying to support my 2 children while hiding bruises under makeup and making excuses for injuries that weren't accidents. I believed that staying in an abusive relationship was better than the unknown dangers of leaving." Orion saw several people in the audience wiping away tears, including Mayor Patterson and Governor Williams' representative. But then something extraordinary happened. Someone saw me, really saw me. Not just the bruises or the fear, but the person underneath who was worth saving. Kenya's eyes found Orion in the crowd, and she smiled. That person was Orion Bridges, who could have simply fired the abusive manager at his store and moved on with his life. Instead, he chose to get involved. He chose to care about one employee's welfare more than his own convenience or safety. The applause was thunderous. Orion felt his cheeks burn as cameras turned toward him, but he kept his focus on Kenya. But this center isn't about one person's generosity, Kenya continued. It's about what's possible when we refuse to accept that abuse is inevitable. When we decide that every person deserves safety, dignity, and the chance to rebuild their life. She gestured toward the walls covered with children's artwork. These pictures were drawn by children who are learning that home should be a place of safety, not fear. That adults can be trusted to protect them, not hurt them. That their voices matter and their feelings are valid. In the audience, Orion spotted several women he recognized from the support groups Kenya had been running. Survivors who had found the courage to leave their abusers, mothers who were rebuilding their lives with their children. The Kenya Vargas Center will provide emergency housing for up to 20 families at a time, Kenya explained. But more than that, we'll provide hope. Job training so women can achieve financial independence. Legal services so they can navigate the complex process of leaving safely. Counseling for both mothers and children to heal from trauma. And most importantly, a community of people who understand that leaving an abuser is not a single decision, but a process that requires support every step of the way. The questions from reporters came fast and focused. Ms. Vargas, what would you say to women who are currently in abusive relationships but feel they can't leave? I would say that you're not alone, and you're not crazy, and it's not your fault. The voice in your head telling you that you deserve this, that you can't do better, that no one will believe you, that's not your voice. That's your abuser's voice. Your real voice is the one that brought you this far, that kept you alive, that protected your children. Trust that voice. Mr. Bridges, what inspired you to make such a significant financial commitment to this cause? Orion stepped forward to the microphone. I learned that you can have all the success in the world, but if you're not using it to help people who need help, then what's the point? Kenya taught me that true leadership isn't about profit margins or market share. It's about seeing the people behind the numbers and making sure they're okay. Ms. Vargas, what's next for you personally? Kenya smiled, and Orion saw the confidence that had grown in her over the past months. I'm starting college in the fall. Social work degree. I want to become a licensed therapist so I can help other survivors heal from trauma. And I'm writing a book about my experience, hoping it might help other women recognize the signs of abuse and find the courage to seek help. After the press conference, as the crowd began to disperse, Orion found Kenya in the children's area, watching Cecilia help younger kids with an art project while Moses demonstrated his latest drawing technique. How does it feel? He asked. Surreal. 6 months ago, I was convinced my life was over. Now I'm running a center that will help hundreds of families. You earned this. Every bit of it. We earned it. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but you would have found a way. You're stronger than you know. Cecilia ran over to them, her face glowing with pride. Mama, I saw you on the TV in the lobby. You looked like a movie star. Did I? Well, you look like a movie star every day, baby girl. Moses joined them, holding up his latest drawing. It showed a large building with children playing outside while adults watched protectively from nearby. It's the new center, he explained. See, everyone is safe and happy. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Kenya said, kneeling down to hug both her children. As Orion watched this family that had been broken by violence and rebuilt by love, he thought about the journey that had brought them all here. The anonymous letters that had led him to go undercover. The moment he'd first seen Kenya crying at her register. The choice to reveal his identity and risk everything to help her. Orion. Kenya's voice brought him back to the present. Yeah. Thank you. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself. Thank you for trusting me despite every reason not to. For taking that leap of faith. What's next for you? More undercover missions. Orion laughed. I think I'll stick to being myself from now on. But I am planning to expand this program. 5 more centers in the next 2 years, each one staffed by survivors who've been trained as advocates. And personally, any plans to settle down, start a family? It was a question Orion had been asking himself lately. His relationship with Kenya had remained strictly professional and supportive, both of them understanding that she needed time to heal and rediscover who she was outside of an abusive relationship. But he'd found himself thinking more about what it would mean to build a life with someone, to be part of a family. Maybe someday, he said, when I find someone who challenges me to be better than I am. Kenya smiled knowingly. I think you might be surprised by what's right in front of you. Before he could ask what she meant, Atlas appeared with a clipboard full of paperwork that needed Orion's attention. As he dealt with the administrative details of opening the center, Orion reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful but disconnected CEO who measured his worth in profit margins and market share. Today, he was part of something bigger than himself, something that would outlast any business success. The Bridges market chain had implemented new policies to support employees in crisis. Every store now had a trained advocate on staff, and the company provided emergency financial assistance and counseling services. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and turnover had dropped significantly. But more than the business improvements, Orion had discovered something he'd never known he was missing. Purpose beyond profit, success measured in lives changed rather than dollars earned. As the sun set over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the center's playground where children played safely while their mothers attended support group meetings, Orion knew he'd found his true calling. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. And sometimes the most successful thing you can do with your life is use it to lift up someone else's. The Kenya Vargas Center would help thousands of families in the years to come. But its first success story was already complete. A woman who had learned she was worth saving, and a man who had learned that true wealth comes from the lives you touch, not the money you make. Love had won, just as it always does when people choose courage over comfort, hope over fear, and each other over everything else. What would you risk to save someone who couldn't save themselves? Sometimes the greatest success stories begin with the smallest acts of courage. Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories that prove love really can conquer all. 2 years later, the graduation ceremony at Georgia State University was held on a crisp autumn morning, with families gathered on the lawn as names were called for the School of Social Work. When Kenya Vargas, Master of Social Work, summa cum laude, echoed across the campus, the cheers from her section were the loudest of the day. Orion applauded from the 3rd row, sitting next to Cecilia and Moses, who held a banner they'd made that read, "Our mom is amazing." In the months since the center's opening, their relationship had evolved slowly and naturally from professional partnership to deep friendship to something that felt like family. "She did it," Moses whispered, bouncing in his seat. "Mama really did it." "We never doubted her," Cecilia said with the wisdom of an 11-year-old who had watched her mother transform from victim to survivor to advocate. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos, Kenya found them in the crowd. She wore her cap and gown with pride, but more importantly, she wore the confidence of someone who had reclaimed her life completely. "Dr. Vargas," Orion said with a grin, "has a nice ring to it. Not quite yet. I still have to finish my dissertation. But close enough. What's the topic again?" Economic abuse as a barrier to leaving. How financial empowerment programs can break the cycle of domestic violence. She smiled. "Turns out my experience was pretty good research material." The Kenya Vargas Center had become a model for domestic violence programs across the country. In 2 years, it had helped over 300 families escape abusive situations, with a 94% success rate for women who completed the full program. The job training component had an 89% employment rate, and the legal services division had won custody cases for 78% of the mothers who sought help. Speaking of the center, Kenya said, I have some news. Good news, I hope. The best. The Department of Health and Human Services wants to fund a national expansion. 25 centers across the country, all using our model. That's incredible. And they want me to head the national program. Dr. Kenya Vargas, National Director of the Bridges Vargas Family Safety Initiative. Orion felt his chest swell with pride. You're going to change the world. We're going to change the world. This is still a partnership, remember. Over the past 2 years, their partnership had indeed flourished. Orion had stepped back from day-to-day operations of Bridges Market, appointing a new CEO while he focused on the foundation work. The company had thrived under new leadership that prioritized employee welfare, and the domestic violence support programs had been adopted by dozens of other corporations. There's something else, Kenya said, her voice softer now. Something personal. What's that? Louisa called yesterday. My sister. She wanted to apologize. This was significant. Kenya's relationship with her sister had been one of the casualties of her abusive relationship with Ryden. Louisa's refusal to believe Kenya's claims about abuse had created a rift that had lasted years. What did she say? That she'd been reading about the center, following the news coverage. She said she finally understood what I was trying to tell her back then. She wants to rebuild our relationship. How do you feel about that? Hopeful. Cautious, but hopeful. She's my only family besides the kids. I'd like them to know their aunt. And Ryden. Kenya's expression hardened slightly. Sentenced to 4 years. He'll be eligible for parole in 18 months, but his lawyer says the parole board is unlikely to grant it given the pattern of escalation. The other women who came forward, their testimony was powerful. The case against Ryden had ultimately included testimony from 5 previous victims, creating an undeniable pattern of abuse. 2 of them had been helped by the center's legal team to file their own charges, and both had won significant settlements that helped them rebuild their lives. What about Dash? Fired from 3 jobs in 2 years. Turns out his management style didn't work anywhere else either. Last I heard, he was working at a call center. The investigation into Dash's management had revealed systematic harassment of vulnerable employees across multiple stores. The company had implemented new training programs and oversight procedures to prevent similar situations. And the other employees from the store? Nyla got promoted to assistant manager. Marcus is in college now, studying business management. He wants to open his own store someday. Lawson retired early with a nice severance package. As they talked, Cecilia and Moses ran ahead to the car, their energy infectious. Watching them, Orion marveled at how resilient children could be when given safety and stability. They're amazing kids, he said. They are. And they adore you. The feeling is mutual. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Orion, Kenya said finally, can I ask you something? Always. What are we doing here? I mean, what is this between us? It was the question they'd been dancing around for months. Their relationship had remained carefully professional, both understanding that Kenya needed time to heal and discover who she was outside of an abusive relationship. But lately, the boundaries had been blurring. I don't know, Orion admitted. What do you want it to be? I want it to be real. I want it to be honest. I want it to be built on choice, not rescue or gratitude or trauma bonding. Is that what you think this is? I think it started that way. You saved me, and I was grateful. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. What did it become? Kenya stopped walking and turned to face him. Love. Real love. The kind that sees all of someone's flaws and chooses them anyway. The kind that makes you want to be better, not because you have to, but because you want to. Orion felt his heart skip a beat. Kenya! I know it's complicated. I know there are power dynamics and public perception issues and a million reasons why it might not work. But I also know that I've spent 2 years learning who I am when I'm not afraid, and the person I am loves you. I love you too, Orion said without hesitation. I have for months. I just didn't want to pressure you or make you feel like you owed me anything. I don't owe you anything, but I choose you. If you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Orion kissed her. It was their first real kiss, soft and tentative and full of promise. You gross. Moses called from the car, making them both laugh. Get used to it, buddy, Cecilia said with the authority of an older sister. They've been making googly eyes at each other for months. As they drove home to the house Orion had bought for Kenya and the children, a real home with a yard and a garden and rooms for everyone, Kenya reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 2 years ago, she'd been a broken woman convinced she had no value beyond what her abuser told her she had. Today, she was a graduate student, a program director, a published author, her book, Invisible Chains, A Survivor's Guide to Recognizing and Escaping Emotional Abuse, had become a bestseller, and most importantly, a woman who knew her own worth. What are you thinking about? Orion asked, noticing her contemplative mood. Just all of it. How different everything is now. Any regrets? Only one. What's that? I wish I could go back and tell that scared woman at register for that everything was going to be okay. That she was stronger than she knew, that help was coming, that her children would grow up safe and happy. I think she knew, Orion said. Deep down, I think she knew she was worth saving. She just needed someone else to see it too. As they pulled into the driveway of their home, Kenya saw the future stretching out before them. A future where domestic violence survivors had real resources and support. Where children grew up understanding that love should never hurt. Where a woman who had once been invisible had become a voice for thousands of others. The Kenya Vargas Center was just the beginning. The national program would help tens of thousands of families. The policy changes they'd advocated for were being implemented across the country. The cultural conversation about domestic violence was shifting, thanks in part to Kenya's willingness to share her story. But beyond all the public success, there was this. A family built on love and choice and the radical belief that everyone deserves safety and dignity and the chance to write their own story. As they walked into their house together, Cecilia and Moses racing ahead to start homework, Orion and Kenya following hand in hand, it was clear that some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with happily ever after, and then they change the world. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is transform your pain into purpose, your survival into service, and your healing into hope for others. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.